Starting out, the road was paved with opportunity, so being brave was an attitude I assumed as my right, choosing a dream to make my life. I had to get in there while I was young, so with hurdles, I had a clock to outrun. Well, I ended up bottoming out, a clumsy outsider, seized with doubt. It was the biggest blow I'd received to date, confused because I'd made sure I'd prayed. Hurt I wouldn't be what I dreamed a, sought after prima ballerina. I retreated as quickly as I'd arrived, devastated, ruined, all at age 5. We never forget that very first calling, but rarely fulfill it when factors involving schools, parents, and obligations, scholarships, stiff upper lip educations. You end up with a really random PhD in industrial hygiene or animal husbandry, then go on to join the Marine Corps to open up a chain of hardware stores. There's only so much you can prepare for life. At some point, you've just got to roll the dice. The beauty in not planning down to the minute, worlds remain oysters. Skies have no limit. The freedom to choose to be anyone doesn't have to be a millennial problem. It gives room to breathe and hopes to nurture. It's not like anyone can really map out a future, unless we're talking dynasties that occupy precise industries, where nepotism is a trade survival tool used to grow shareholder trust in you. Family-owned and family-run culture, so genetic you could inherit an ulcer. Until an outsider cruises right on in. Is he that weird nephew from Michigan? Where are you from? It doesn't seem near. If you weren't raised watches, what brings you here? Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jeff Kingston, and normally it's a privilege to have people like we have in front of us now on a panel, but today I'm thinking of it as a double privilege, because every person with me here has not only achieved in one career, they've achieved in a second career. And I'd like to start on my right with Pascal Raffi, who had a brilliant career in pharmaceuticals. He grew Synthé Labo to become the third largest pharmaceutical company in France before he sold his shares at the behest of his daughter to have a different kind of life. And that different kind of life came when he bought Beauvais in 2001 and has transformed a brand that was, if I can say so before you bought it, slightly asleep and now producing just wonderful things. Next to me is Aldous Hodge, who I think of as a Renaissance man, an artist, a painter, a violin player, and an incredibly accomplished actor. If you've seen his movies, Hidden Figures, Straight Out of Compton, Big Mama's House, he won an award. He won an award for his role in Hidden Figures, and he has a new movie coming out called Clemency, and on top of that, a very, very popular TV series, City on a Hill. To my left is the chief designer today for Bulgari, Fabrizio Buonamassa, who has designed everything that I can think of practically, shoes, glasses, cars, motorcycles, and today watches. And finally, a man of incredible accomplishment. I feel my own resume should be shredded when I think of his career. A PhD physicist from Harvard, a professor of physics at the University of Sydney, founder and CEO of a cutting-edge technology company in quantum physics, Michael Bierschik. So we are lucky to have all of them here today to talk about how they have been transformed from the careers that I've described now to come into the watch world. And I think I'd like to start our little chat by having each of you kind of talk about your views of collecting before you came into the watch business. And Pascal, I know you had quite a collection before you came in.
This is correct. Before than anything, good evening, everyone. The criteria, the only criteria which always guided me is uniqueness. It has been uniqueness in design, in mechanics, in the way to dress a timepiece, to make it bringing you emotion. And this is what art has to bring you, that emotion, different ones, through different timepieces, different brands, different periods. It's about a passion for beautiful watchmaking.
Yeah, all this, how have you seen yourself as a collector before now, before you started designing watches?
I don't know if I'd really consider myself a collector before I started designing, because I definitely could not afford to be considered a collector. You know, I just went to the store and saw a lot of pretty things. But when I actually started purchasing, I purchased watches based off of what I could learn. They taught me design. I really liked skeletal movements or open work movements with architecture, because that's how I taught myself what horology really was. That's what spoke to me, because it's how I saw this visual thing that represented how my mind actually thought. So for me, you know, little by little, I started buying, you know, things that were special to me because of the watchmaker or the contribution that was mechanically devised within that watch. So for me, my initial collecting, so to speak, was school. It was education. I was buying lessons.
Yeah, I could probably jump in and say I know what I was doing beforehand, and that was making lots of mistakes. You open a drawer and say, what was I thinking? Now, Fabrizio, before you came into the watch industry, were you also attracted to watches and a collector?
Hi, everyone. Yes, I received my first watch when I was, I don't remember, 5, 6, during my childhood. And I love watches, but I love objects. So I prefer to use the object instead of collect. Because as a designer, I love to imagine why a designer imagine and try to draw something and to produce something. Watch is something that you carry with you, you put on your wrist. There's a very strong link with your life. That's something that interests me as a designer. But I don't have a collection of watches, and even before to jump in the watches industry, I wear some watches, but I'm more passionate in the history behind the watches than in the product itself.
And this was before you came into the
Yes.
industry. That was the way you looked at it. And Michael, how about yourself?
I think it's also a recent occurrence for me to be considered a collector in any appreciable manner. But going back to a very young age, I was always in love with watches. And I would spend every kind of $5 that I would save up in quarters on buying cheap Casios. And for me, the appeal, and I loved science even then, was to buy as complicated a calculator as you could. Digital calculators were the thing in the 80s when I was growing up on wristwatches. And my interest in watches more or less faded through my teen years. I had no money, right? I wasn't going to keep buying calculator watches.
That tends to be kind of an
That's right.
obstacle. Yeah.
I also had a tendency to not understand water resistance and destroy every one of these watches that I would save up to buy. But my interest came back later, and the interest was really tied to the idea of watches as mechanical computers. That if you look at some high complication, a perpetual calendar or something, it's a computer program written in metal. And that to me was really profound and something that gave a way to connect in a human sense to something that otherwise is quite remote.
So, I mean, at this period when you're sort of experimenting around, buying some things, collecting some things, did any of you ever have a thought that you would come inside to the industry in any way?
No, I could say absolutely not. I'm happy it found me, but I've been an actor since I was 2 years old. That was always going to be the continuous career. I'm still an actor, but I also wanted to be an architect at the same time. But it's sort of impossible to balance architect and actor at the same time. So when I was in school for design, architecture and product design was my major, but I switched to watch design because it encompassed all the things that I loved, which were architecture, engineering, and art. So I was like, you know what, I can take my time, I can learn this, I can build this out, and I can still be passionate about this years later and not feel exhausted by the idea of it or the interest of it. But it's definitely not something that I really started taking seriously until I was about 19 or 20. Yeah.
Okay. Now, Pascal, there's part of your story that's always intrigued me, which is you came into the watch industry through your version of a blind tasting. Tell us about that.
In fact, I got retired when I was 38 to take care of my oldest daughter at that time in 2000. And one of my bankers, who became a dear friend, he's still a very good friend, came to my house with a few brands who needed investors. And with all due respect to everyone, the only timepiece he made me discover by hiding it, choosing a few of my timepieces of my collection, and hiding the Bovet timepiece has been a Bovet timepiece. And only by touching the timepiece itself, the way the leather strap was fixed to the timepiece was unusual, and it could not be one of my collection. And here, by discovering the Bovet timepiece, I discovered, first of all, uniqueness in design, a case which you will recognize always, returning the timepiece itself, craftsmanship, enameling on the rotor, set with pearls, beautiful finishings of all components, a beautiful ergonomy seated on your wrist. And here I started listening to him. And he told me that the house of Bovet was in seek of investors. And the beautiful story started then.
So you didn't go into it thinking, I'm going to go into the watch business and he'll help me choose. It was, you were, can I use the word seduced, kind of, to do that?
I think that that encounter made me realize that since I'm 13, definitely it was my dream. And by discovering that timepiece, I understood this is the passion I want to exercise on my everyday's life. But with a project which is very specific, limited quantities, quality above everything, due respect to the patrimony of that house, which has nearly 200 years, artisans, human beings, done by hand, the maximum possible. The machine at the service of the artisan being the soul, 70 of them all together, giving birth to a movement of 300 components or 800, and knowing that they have a moral duty to serve a collector who will pay respect and collect your timepieces. So it's a full journey.
Now, so Fabrizio, I think you famously said you are a designer as distinguished from saying you were a watch designer. So with all of the different things you have designed in your life, how did you gravitate toward designing watches?
I love watches. I start to make sketches when I was young. At the beginning was, if I remember well, was a comics, just to understand the way to make sketches. Immediately after was cars, and after was a watch. I think I have passion for products, for objects. For me, it's to design cars, to design objects, to design chairs, or shoes, or sunglasses. It's almost the same things. You have a client in front of you, and you have to answer each time the same question. Why someone have to use an object designed by you? It's the passion to draw, the passion for design. At the end, for me, design watches, imagine the evolution of some shapes, play with the heritage of the brand, and play with the iconic sign of the brand is the most exciting things. So when I worked for Fiat, I'm a former car designer. It's a very complex object. Imagine a design center in the automotive industry is more or less 40, 50 designers, 60 designers. And each one has a small part of the car. No? You have the interior team, you have the exterior team, you start to design steering wheels.
I mean, do you ever get the point to say, that taillight was mine? I mean,
at a certain moment, I say, okay, I'm a car designer. I'm able to design many, many things around me.
Yeah.
Because if you have to design a seat, you design a chair. When you have to design a steering wheel, you design a piece of furniture design. It's a very strong connection with your hand. At a certain moment, I say, but I love watches. And I think that the car could be a bit boring, because so many people around the same project to design a gasket, to design a small components. And that's why I say I would love to try different things. As a designer, it's very important to be able to design different things, because otherwise you're obsessed about the same object, and at the end, your creativity is focused just on one object, and you start to design each time the same things. That's why for me it's important to design an helicopter or an airplane or a car on a watch. At the end, it's the same things, but you nourish your creativity in this way.
so, I mean, did the House of Bulgari come to you, or did you go to them? How
Honestly,
did
I
it come about?
choose Bulgari, because it's the closest brand with to my taste. We talk about the Italian design culture. We play with pure shapes. I'm not someone able to play with the added decorative elements. I prefer very simple and pure shapes. And I was fascinated by the aluminum, by the scuba, by the story behind even the jewelry of this brand, because the roots come from the Italian design culture, thanks to Gianni Bulgari, thanks to other designers who worked with Bulgari. At a certain moment, honestly, this is a true story. I saw an advertising campaign on a magazine, a picture of the aluminum, and I saw a small numbers, and I called this number. I say, I'm interested. Do you have a design center? Where is in Rome, in Milan? Yes, we have. This is the number you can call. And I make some sketches. I send some sketches to the design center, the manager, and Mr. Paolo Bulgari called me after 1 week to have an interview. And this was 18 years ago. So
Brother, it was that easy for you? I've been sketching for 10 years.
yeah.
Brother, it took me about
Maybe you make your own sketches. I'm joking.
That's
No,
why
it
I'm
was-
an
it was
independent.
easy.
That's why I started designing for myself.
Even for Fiat was the same for me. I started to study the history of the brand. And
Yeah.
I start to make sketches that could make sense with the brand and with the evolution of the product of this brand.
Yeah.
And I make a beautiful portfolio. Now it's made with the computers.
Yeah.
During my age was tons of paper with markers and ballpoint pens.
Oh, I still have a sketchbook, yeah.
And I sent it was each time when I joined Fiat, when I left Fiat, when I joined Bulgari, when I left Bulgari, when I joined Bulgari again, it was like this. I have some idea and I show you my ideas. It makes sense for your brand or not? Often, 99%, it makes sense. But maybe I was lucky, I don't know.
I've been in that 1% for a little while. Mama, we're gonna start looking up some numbers, start making some calls, you know. Just make a list.
So talk about what you're doing, sketching watches and designing now. Okay, because that
Well, so
you're 1%.
My 1%. So when I was like 21, 22, I started sketching concepts and concepts for different companies. So I would reach out and, hey, how you doing? This is what I'm doing. I would love to design for you. And they're like, okay, but you have no watchmaking history. No, I'm like, yeah, I know, but it's what I love. Okay, cool. Let's set a meeting. We're in Switzerland. I'm like, okay, cool. A couple weeks later, hey, I'm in Switzerland. They're like, oh, you came. Yeah, I was serious. I hope I'm not repeating myself, but I met with a bigger brand it's not an independent brand, and I showed them some designs, and they are the ones who set me on my independent path because they said, brother, we don't make this. I said, no, it's simple. There's a retrograde, there's a perpetual calendar, and there's a tourbillon. It's 3 different models. It's simple. They're like, this is not what we do. You need to go be an independent if you want to see your dreams realized. So I was very grateful to them. They set me on that path. They said it was a very difficult path, which I understood. But through the years, I kept trying to design for other people, and I kept getting no's, a lot of no's. So I said, you know what, I'm going into business for myself. In my mid-20s, like 24, 25, I started my company, made a few prototypes that no one will ever see. But happy I made those. And I just kept on designing, and what I didn't realize was that I was refining my DNA, my personal taste, and my vision that I was going to give to the world. Eventually, I met the man who eventually became my strategist and manufacturing partner. And it's crazy because this is a very well-respected horologist who was my very first inspiration to an introduction to independent design. I started studying his and his team's designs, and that's what informed my sort of palette for what to look for when it came to watch design and horology. So it was crazy that literally 10 years later, he saw my stuff and he said, I believe in you. And I was like, universe, you're testing me. Well, I see. And, he's been a great strategist and mentor for me and through the years, and, still helping me work on my prototypes. So right now, I'm in pre-study on 2 different models.
So but I have a question, which really comes from what Aldous said, and it's something that you have to live with every day, which is you can come up with a gorgeous design that the watchmakers can't make. So
Yes.
how do you deal with that kind of a problem?
Honestly, a designer is not an artist. It's someone that needs a team able to turn a piece of paper, a creativity, in a real product. I make many sketches, I imagine many products, and immediately after I start to discuss with our manufacturing side, with our watchmasters, with our product development team. And often, I'm honest with you, often the answer is, it's impossible to do. Often. But my designer is a compromise, so you have to play with constraints. I say, why is it impossible to do? Because we are not have the technology today to make this, this, and this. And say, come on. I remember last time was when we made the Tubogas, Serpenti Tubogas with the 3 different golds, white gold, rose gold, and yellow gold. And say, no, it's impossible to do. You say, come on, we made it 40 years ago. Now it's impossible to do. Yes, because now we don't have we have more technology to do this, but we have to find a way to do it. So each day of my life, I have to play with constraints. But it's something that you develop together. It's not just a one-man show.
Isn't there something that in your background in the car industry that sort of gives you that adaptability because they give you rules, and if you don't follow the rules, you're in trouble?
Automotive design today, it's completely different. You have tons of books for the regulation, for different countries, for different regions of the world, and you have to play with these rules. So they give you the chassis, they give you the engine, and they give you the package. You have to design the side view of the car. You have all the elements for the ergonomics, and you have to respect tons of rules in terms of regulations.
So are watches like that?
No, fortunately not. We love to play with Watchmasters that makes amazing watches that you can see here with Independent, with the big company. but we can play with the rules in a different way.
Pascal, do you find that to be one of your challenges as well, that you imagine something and your watchmakers go, nope?
I have to tell you, it's absolutely what makes the passion for your everyday life. You imagine timepieces through one word, sustainability in your collections, due respect paid to that patrimony of a house since nearly 200 years, as I told you. And then you come with your crazy ideas. But if you allow yourself to have crazy ideas, it's also because you absolutely believe in your artisans, you engineers.
Yeah.
They are strong. And 99% of the time, again, they doubt that they can achieve it.
Yeah.
Because you come with these ideas like a Grand Recital, a Braveheart, and the first word again and again, Mr. Raffi, no.
Yeah,
This
exactly.
time, forget it. And the journey to make that all through the months, they start having a little smile up to the beautiful moment where the baby is born and you see its heart beating with these beautiful finishings. It's every time a fantastic adventure. Every time.
So, but here's something that you're touching on that I think is interesting. When you come to the industry from outside, you've done something else in your life. Do you see yourself thinking in a different way than the people who have been in the industry all of
Yes.
their lives?
And honestly, I was shocked because we spent more or less 1 month to have a one-on-one scale prototype of a car. And when I joined Bulgari, I waited 2 months to have a prototype of a dial.
Okay.
Say, come on, guys, in 1 month, we made 2 one-on-one scale, one for the exterior and one for the interior. And you know, Fabrizio, but the dial is made by hand, is an alchemy, because we play with the chemical elements, we play with different materials, and you have to wear the watch every day around the world with different climate conditions. It was completely different world, completely different world. Today, the watchmaking is still made by hand. We have our manufacturing site to make dial, is still an alchemy, sometimes it's a mystery, because is it possible to do this or not? No, at the beginning is, no, it's not possible. Immediately after is, we find a way to do it. But this was the biggest, it was a shock for me, because the dimension of the two companies, the two worlds are completely different, in terms of investment, in terms of people to work behind the products. And this was very interesting, because coming from the automotive industry to make watches, it seemed, okay, it's very easy. It's not easy at all, because you have to completely change the way of thinking. I made sketches. When I presented my sketchbook to Mr. Paolo Bulgari, the sketches were on this side. And the watches on the sketches were almost like this. And Mr. Paolo said, Fabrizio, your sketches are amazing, but you have to imagine that the watch is more or less 40, maximum 42, at those times, 42, 43 millimeters. And your sketches are full of details. It's impossible to do at the same, in this way on the real product. So each time that you change the category, you have to change your way of thinking, because the languages, the DNA, and the technology behind different categories is completely, completely different.
Now, Michael, you've come in from the world of quantum physics to become close to watch people. Do you perceive that you're seeing what they're doing in a different way than they do?
I think to start, the way we approach what we do as scientists is just totally different. There's no such thing as tradition in what we're doing. There is no long-standing way that a particular problem is solved, because the problems we're attacking are always brand new. Everything is brand new. And I have never in my career had the experience of, that was just described here, if someone says, no, 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 we can't do it, and then they kind of come around. Everybody in our field is embracing new challenges and building totally new things. So this idea of coming from a world in which there is no such thing as tradition and entering a world that is dominated by tradition has been quite interesting. I think what I brought was an aspect of storytelling. And the storytelling was all about the way we as scientists approach the world and how that actually connected to this exceptionally traditional industry. And my kind of entry into the field came that way, that I was telling stories I had done a TED Talk, and then I did a follow-on to that, which was, they called it TED Adventures. So behind the scenes, they asked us to take 20 people around for a day, one personal thing and one professional thing. So the personal thing was to go to a watch boutique and to talk about why I was excited about high complications in high horology. And the professional aspect was taking people to my laboratory and then showing them how the same technology, the same science that, for instance, Breguet developed in 1801 to build the tourbillon is actually in use today and inspires the work that my team does to make technology out of quantum physics. And it was the idea of just telling the story of watchmaking in a completely different way, solving a totally new problem, that was the interesting and exciting part.
Well, there's got to be one thing that lies behind this. You're a scientist. You're going to places where nobody has gone before in quantum physics. So you have an idea about what innovation really is. And so when you look at the watch industry, how do you see innovation happening compared to what you're doing in your, I'll call it your day job?
Well, it's an extremely interesting problem because it's constrained in a really weird way, right? We all agree that watchmaking, traditional watchmaking, mechanical watchmaking, has nothing to do with making more precise timekeeping instruments anymore, right? Quartz is better. I actually build atomic clocks, which are literally billions of times better than the kinds of clocks you wear on your wrist. So given this idea that we forsake the obligation to achieve the best, like you had to in the 17th and 18th century with mechanical watches, what we're trying to solve is totally different. And it's exciting that you get to try new things without being encumbered by this task of building an instrument that is the best in the world. And so, I mean, I see that the innovation that comes from that is actually really interesting and beautiful. And it comes in pushing a technology that we all agree is in many respects dead, right? This is not the cutting edge in timekeeping. And yet you can do totally new things, have new complications, package things in completely new ways, again, in a way that I think builds human connection. That's the most exciting part to me.
So just to keep the challenge going, now that all of us have been outside, come inside, do you see the watch world differently now that you have gone inside from the way you saw it before? I mean, you can find it to be more wonderful, or you can find it maybe to be a little bit deceptive. All this, how are you seeing it?
I've definitely been educated on how to appreciate watches and fine watchmaking. That's for certain. I look at watches differently now. Whenever I look at a dial, the way my mind works is I'm immediately looking through the dial to see the composition of the movement, to see where things are placed. I kind of play that guessing game, you know what I mean? But now understanding all that goes into crafting, say for instance, a time-only watch that is handmade, maybe to the untrained eye, someone might say, well, this is just it's a simple watch, like anybody could do that. And you're like, okay, brother, so what I'm gonna do is put you in a factory. I'm gonna give you about 2 years and see if you can accomplish that. And you'll quickly realize how much work, how much specificity, how much strategy and brilliance goes into the idea of something simple. Oftentimes, as designers, we have a term merging complexity and simplicity called simplexity. All right, it's just what we do. That's our challenge, and I think as designers, to a degree, market makers from the outside coming in, our job, I know for me, my job primarily is to help people experience time telling in new ways. And I love the cultural aspect of what my introduction to horology has now given me. Primarily being, shoot, I'm here in Dubai. Hello, everybody. Watchmaking brought me here. Watchmaking has given me new appreciation for different languages, learning different languages, meeting new people, engaging in different cultures. Watchmaking to me is so many other different elements than just this mechanical piece. It's so much more passion and history behind it. And I get to experience the world through that. So that's how my eyes have been opened.
Have any of you had any experiences in, say, in looking at components that maybe you took for granted before? You know, looking at a wheel, how did they make the wheel? How have they been able to produce it with the precision that's necessary for the watch to run right, or a pinion, or how do you make a bracelet that's really wonderful and flexible and robust at the same time? We go snap, snap, it's on, done.
So I had this experience that I used to look at watches as brilliant objects. That they, you know, it's technical prowess and you can do these extraordinary things building computers in metal. I have a very different experience now that I don't see an object, I see the people behind it. And maybe it's by virtue of the organizations that I'm most closely connected to, but now it's I see the product director and the drinks we had at SIHH. And the many drinks we had at SIHH, and then I see you know the case back. It's a Lange, and there's an engraved balance cock, and I see the team of people who build these balance cocks, hand engrave them, and you know you show them your watch, and they say, oh, you know, Pascal made that one, or whoever. It's no longer about this inanimate object. It's entirely about the community. And that carries over for me to the collector community, the fact that I get to sit here with all of you and all of you. And you know, how many people I've met, as shameful as it is to admit, via Instagram, that have actually become close friends in the watchmaking community. There we go.
We met on Instagram.
We met on Instagram.
Well, one question then. Do any of you see yourselves as change agents? Because you've come in from the outside. Have you moved the mark forward because you have some different ideas than what were there before?
I think you change the point of view because even in terms of age and experience, I design things different way. If I remember when I designed things when I was young. As a designer, it's very important to know very well the technology behind the watches, the brand DNA, the history behind the brand, but at the same time, put back in your brain. Because it's very important to have a double point of view. Someone who knows very well the industry, at the same time someone doesn't know very well the industry. To have each time, because otherwise when you make sketches, you are so passionate and so in love about your ideas that you are not 100% objective. I don't know how do you say. Your idea is each time the best. So sometimes it's better to have a certain distance from, yes, I know the technology that we have to produce a bracelet, a dial, but I try each time to find a new limit. Because if you are in a deep dive in this kind of process, sometimes again, you start to design, to imagine each time the same things. So it's interesting to know very well the process. That's why I love to visit our suppliers, because I saw the machine on the gentleman that makes a certain process. I say, okay, if we can make this, we can make even another things. But at the same time, you have to oblige. You have to forget it. Because otherwise could be dangerous. And each time is interesting to discover, each time the same things to have a wow effect. So otherwise it's difficult to break the rules and to make something different. But maybe this is my point of view as a designer. I don't know.
Pascal, have you broken any rules?
I think yes.
I understood also that patience is the key element.
Yeah.
We were talking about cars before, we can talk about planes. The scale of a timepiece with hundreds of components bring you to humility, to have that luxury of time. And I'm very lucky on my everyday basis. We have 70 artisans in the facility. We do our cases, dials, hands, movements, hairsprings. So I'm very fortunate because when you live with your artisans, these 43 different skills in the same building, where you do your components, you engrave them, you decorate them, you do the cases, you imagine the ergonomy, it's an absolute luxury. And for me, It's always what I call the step further. Year after year, with that same wisdom, how can we achieve a little more? We are already at a level which is complicated, but complication not only on the features of the movement, complication also is the way to dress a timepiece, to put stones, to miniature paint a dial, to hand engrave a mother of pearl dial, the way to blue the hands, respecting a tradition, but also having that ability to have designs much more modern, but with the same soul and the same blood, the good blood of watchmaking.
So now, when you look at the watches you had before you bought Bovet, do you see them in a different light now that you've tried to make watches?
There
and made
is a
watches?
huge difference between collecting and diving in the concerns of everyday building, thinking, developing, listening to watchmakers, to all the ateliers. It's a whole different world. Here, you exercise your passion absolutely, and then you understand that at that time, perhaps you had the sensitivity to understand a beautiful timepiece that you were collecting, but you did not absolutely understand how energy it takes, patience, of a collectivity altogether to make a movement working. One artisan fails in its tolerances by engraving. You know that in a car, we can take out a component. In a timepiece like these, you have one issue. You disassemble 705 components. You have 10 days power reserve. So your cycle to service is nearly 3 months. This is the beauty of the journey. The scale, the human beings involved, the fact to keep your DNA, pushing a step further, it's an absolute luxury.
And you know when you start, and you never know when you finish.
Exactly.
Develop a movement. Sometimes you spend 5, 6 years. At the end, say, what do you think? You say, I think that it's over. We lost the momentum. So, and this is the part of the job.
But this being said, when whatever is the offer, whatever is the expression of timepieces, we have a lot of beautiful timepieces in the windows, all brands included. When a timepiece has been thought properly, even 30, 40, 50 years after, it will talk to you. It will bring you that emotion. You will respect it.
So now, each one of you has a favorite and a place where you are right now, and something that occupies you, particularly for Fabrizio and for Pascal. You have brands that you love and you're working with. How much do you look outside, like you did as a collector? You know, a collector can walk in and walk through SIHH or walk through Basel and be dazzled by many things. When you have a brand, when you're designing for a brand, does that narrow your focus, or do you still look outside, like you did as a collector?
I have to tell you, but I'm very cautious with my words. With all due respect, I never look outside. But I know why. I want to express the sustainability of what I think good for the house of Bovet. It's not disrespect. And by the way, I had a very good experience. We were with Aldis at the Grand Prix d'Horlogerie de Genève.
Yeah.
It's the first time in 20 years I have been able to discover so many timepieces, so many different offers. And I have been delighted by at least 10 of them because of that detail, that mechanics, that finishing, that jewelry, that pusher, which is a pure emotion. You push it, you change your time zone. That beautiful thin movement, absolutely, when you take the magnifying glass and you say, oh, this is true watchmaking. That chronometry, absolute performance. So now, when I come back to the Bovet facilities, to the castle where we express our watchmaking, we rather prefer to stay in that sustainability of what the Bovet offer has to be.
So now, what about you, Michael? I mean, you're close to Lange. Do you?
Yeah,
Look outside.
my whole entry into this industry came through Lange, right? So I owe some allegiance, if you will. My first ever watch event of any sort was dinner with the CEO of Lange and the managing director of Asia. So it was a weird place to enter. And then my first ever my second ever event in the watch industry was a private tour of the manufacturer. So I'm very close to them. I still buy other things. I still collect other watches, but I am a member of this small collectors group, Lange Nation. And I come back to a point I made earlier, which is about the people. There are many, many watches I love. There are many watches that I covet because they're out of my reach. Sometimes I'm able to get something new and it's exciting and it is not from Lange. But Lange is the only brand with whom I have a personal connection to so many people in the industry. And hopefully that will grow. I hope that expands as I'm more in the industry. But I feel the loyalty to the people first.
I mean, I think of winemakers that I know, and they tend to
You
be
always think of winemakers.
because I love wine. They sometimes are in two categories. There are winemakers who only know their own wines, and there are winemakers who know lots of different wines. Now, Fabrizio, which kind of winemaker are you?
I think it's important to know all the wine if you are a winemaker.
Yeah.
To know the field, no? The competition.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you can get inspiration from your competitor, or sometimes you can improve something that comes from other worlds. This is my way of thinking. I don't have just one source of inspiration. I know very well all the watches that are around me, but if I have one idea and I think that this idea is the correct one for my brand and for the evolution of some iconic signs, I go straight. It's interesting to know very well the market, but it's even something that you have to, again, you have to forget, otherwise it could be dangerous for your creative process. The creative process is something very, very unique. You start to have an idea and you start to make sketches. At the beginning, the idea is still fragile, so you don't want to talk to any other because it could be very easy. Yes, but maybe it could be very dangerous. So at the beginning, you protect your ideas like a small baby, and when the ideas start to grow up, you make sketches and sketches and sketches. You start to have the idea, you start to talk with other person. But if you start to have, I have this idea, but I look at the other watch, on the other watch, and the other watch, at the end your watch it becomes a Frankenstein because your influences is so different because maybe your idea is not strong enough at the beginning. I'm sincere. I think that sometimes we need just one simple and clever idea, even to make just a small innovation. Our clients need something different because otherwise if you make a new material with a new movement, with 24 different complications, they need to read this instruction book because otherwise how can I use this object? So I think it has to be simple, have to be innovative, have to respect the DNA. You have to know the market and your competitor, but first of all, you have to know the client in front of you because otherwise you miss many opportunities.
So we have to be really brief because we don't have too much more time. Do any of you have any advice for people who are thinking of abandoning what they're doing and going into the watch industry? Apart from don't, but, or by all means.
You don't need to. I mean, how about that as a start? You can do both.
Yeah.
You haven't given up acting, Aldis. No.
Nope.
Please don't, sir.
I will be, 110 years old, sitting in a director's chair, yelling action at the same time, still sketching my next watch. It's a crazy field to get into, so you got to be a little crazy, but very ambitious, very passionate. But when you go into it, I think from the purest point of an artist communicating to your audience, know your idea, know your DNA, know what you want to give to your audience, because that's the passion that's going to continue to keep you curious and healthy and happy through your journey as you go through, because it's a very hard road, It is hard when you're sitting there working on a design, 3-4 years, and then, you see this new watch come out and it has everything that you've been working on. You're like, I didn't see this. Where did they see? Were they spying on me? And either you have the fortitude to continue pushing through and have confidence in yourself and knowing your brand DNA is strong enough to carry, or you try to pivot. And the thing is, you have to understand where your strengths are. You have to stay rooted in that so that you know what language you're speaking to the client, to the audience, to the world of horology. So it's a very difficult industry to enter into. But I think the difficulty is what carves out innovation. It's supposed to be difficult so we can think differently, so we can give you a completely new experience. That's our job, to challenge the difficulties.
Be confident in what you have to offer. That's the
Absolutely.
way I would say it. Who would have thought just a few years ago, I mean, for myself, that any major house in high horology would be interested in the story of quantum physics plus watches. And yet I told the story and it resonated with someone and I get to be here, right?
Yeah.
So we have just a few minutes for some questions, if anybody in the audience has a question.
Do you think, now that you're on the inside, it would have been easier joining an established brand and becoming the designer of that brand because you have the patrimony that others were talking about? Or do you think it's easier to start from scratch and start with something fresh and say, this is who I am? What is easier, buying a legacy, buying into that legacy and adapting it to your vision, or just starting for the blank sheet?
I'm not certain. I can't say for certain because they both present different challenges. So if I was to enter in league with an established brand right now, based off of my public profile from entertainment, I'm immediately discredited as a true horologist because now I get the easy layup because I'm just coming in based off of the idea of popularity or recognition as opposed to the actual work done as a horologist. So for me, I would then have to work harder to prove myself. For a number of years, as I was delving into horology, my company was a completely different name, just so people didn't tie my horology to entertainment, you know? Because I wanted them to see this is what I do, it's what I love, but it's what I live. Because I'm always gonna have to outrun that shadow of, oh, actor who wants to put colors together as opposed to artist who happens to act and happens to also design and be an engineer. So they do present their difficulties. The road that I know as an independent is the one that I love. It's the one I will continue to pursue. And I mean, as a conceptual designer, I'm still a fan of many brands and would love to work with anybody anytime, but I still am happy that I chose the road I chose.
Actually, my question was also for all this, and I wanted to ask you, you founded your own brand, so I wanted to ask you where does your brand stand now? What are the plans and what's going on?
Constant development. No, I'm in, like I said, pre-study on 2 models, one of which I'm hoping to have completed within at least the next 1.5 to 2 years. But again, you know, like the fella said, we don't really give timelines because it gets done when it feels like it. But, you know, I'm still passionately pushing for it, and, you know, again, we'll see. It'll get done when it gets done, but at the end of the day, all I know is that it will get done. I will not give up.
My question's for Michael. Clearly, you were a friend of the brand with Lange. Where do you see yourself now that you're here, making a greater impact in the watch industry across the board? Where do you want to go from here, from right now, this moment on that stage?
That's an exceptionally good question. On the one hand, it's about personal enjoyment, that I derive a tremendous amount of joy from getting to be here and share this story with you, with everyone else in the audience, and to meet everybody that I've met in this journey for myself. So that's the really selfish aspect, and I can't discount that. On the other hand, I'm really motivated to share this story of science and the impact of science and technology with as broad a community as possible. And one way that I've identified to try and do this is by linking to things that enable an easier human connection. It's really hard to feel warm and fluffy about quantum physics as a concept. Maybe you don't have that problem, but I do. It's hard to get warm and fluffy about all sorts of abstract mathematics. But if you can take those concepts that are so important and transformative for society and turn them into something or link them to something where people can feel an emotional response, something like watches, jewelry, things like that, then I think you have an ability to reach a much broader audience. And so my objective really is to share this story. I mean, the watches, quantum physics and the tourbillon, that's one very narrow aspect of it. But there's a much bigger storyline about the future of technology and the historical roots of technology and things that build human connection that I'm keen to share.
Hi, over here. So my question is for everyone on the panel. So as one of the, I would say probably one of the few very young people in the room, the question that I have for all of you is, now that you are custodians of horology, how do you see yourselves as people who might pass on the legacy or the things that you have learned in the industry to young people, and how do you appeal to those people, particularly in the age of smartwatches, where everything is shiny and can tell you what your Instagram posts are about relative to beautiful mechanical pieces like the ones that you all are part of and the ones that everyone in this room seems to be wearing?
Can I pretend I'm still a young person?
Yeah,
How young are you,
I'm
brother?
still young.
yeah.
How young are you?
I'm 24. I'm 25, more or less.
Yeah.
I have many, many years. We are obliged to pass to other people, fortunately, because otherwise it become difficult.
Right.
It's a part of the job. Yeah. So for sure, our idea is to produce something that you, first of all, you have to pass to someone.
Mm-hmm.
But for sure, we have a young designer in my team, and I hope I will pass the direction to other young people. We need a different way of thinking, because otherwise, even in terms of age, it's very important. So I think we are obliged.
Yeah. And I'd like to jump in on one thing you said in the age of smart watches. Because in a way, it's a lesson from the 70s and 80s that got forgotten, and it's being learned again now, which is when quartz came along, it was seen as competition for the then mechanical watch, until people figured out they were two different things. One was art, craft, tradition, emotion. The other told you what time it was.
Right.
And the smartwatch, you know, is a notification device. It tells me the calories on my bike ride. It does all of those things,
Yes.
but there's no art, there's no craft.
Yes.
This is a disposable product that will be obsolete in 2 years. So I think you
yeah.
separate the worlds.
I think this is the difference.
People-
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I didn't want to cut you. You know.
I think this is the difference between even luxury product and something that it's impossible to become a luxury product, because mechanical piece is something that you pass to someone. It's a part of the heritage of your family. Connected watches is a tool, it's not a watch. And after 2 years, 3 years, you are obliged to buy a new one, because the old one, it's impossible, become impossible to use. So if you make diamonds and gold on the case, it's a completely different object. So it's 4 years ago in Switzerland, everybody was scared about the connected watches. This is the end again of the Swiss watchmaking industry. It's not the end. It's just another market with different product, with different clients. Today the market is so big and so huge. You have space for many different clients. But the connected watch and the smartwatch is just a small, let me say, small part of the market. With
And
clients.
there is one thing, a smartwatch will not bring you emotion.
No.
You take your mobile, if you want to know exactly what
Exactly.
time it is, you have it here. Here you have something transporting you, there is a story to tell, you see artisans through the diving in a timepiece. It's absolutely about emotion, art, whatever is the expression of art, modern, classical, conservative, but can be innovative also.
Yes, sure.
They are complementary in everyday's life.
yeah.
but
I would,
for
I would maybe
different
not
targets.
be,
Speak to the.
I would maybe not be as dismissive of the relevance and the emotional attachment that people can have to their digital devices. And I don't mean that in a flippant way. I mean that if you look through, you know, history of artistic development in the 20th century, people still love paintings, even though we also do digital design,
Yeah.
right? And people can feel deep connection to digital design. You know, just look at any 3D animated movie, right? These are things that people love. They feel a deep connection to. And I think maybe, you know, smartwatches will get better and cater to that need as well. But just like people still love paintings and go to the Louvre and see, you know, these beautiful things from the 16th century and feel something, I think young people today are very likely to feel a similar response. And I also want to break the generational narrative that people have this monolithic view, if you're 25 or younger, about what is artistic and what you value. There's huge diversity in what people like. And I think that will persist as well.
Well, as a painter, I was actually going to speak to that very point,
Sorry, man.
which I appreciate, you know what I mean? And yeah, look, watchmaking, the idea of appreciating watches caught me young. The reason I started my company is for legacy, the idea of such. I want to teach others. I want to be a representation, and regardless of what we try to do or think we know, we are all representatives of what we are doing, and somebody's watching that, right? Somebody's checking the blueprint. So we continue that legacy with representing ourselves well and representing our passion for horology well. And we're always bringing somebody up. I, in fact, want to start a program to put little kids in rooms with CNC machines at a very young age so they can get an understanding and idea of what that satisfaction is when it comes to making something, when it comes to appreciating something. They will never forget that experience. Regardless of what they appreciate or how they appreciate it, they will always be able to respect it, right? So I think a part of our duty in terms of respecting what it is we do as designers, horologists, is a part of ensuring the love and the respect and the craftsmanship and the continuation of what we do. So naturally, we have to bring up a younger generation, and I appreciate your question. I think it was brilliant.
And by the way, the smartwatches are not, we are not against two products. They feed each other, they're complementary,
Right.
they help each other. They have two different needs.
It's two different, yeah.
So according to my thing here, I think we're out of time. I want to thank all of my colleagues on the stage. I've been fascinated hearing all the stories. Thank you very much.
Thank you, brother, and thank you for coming.